In the 17th century, the Dutch East India Company was the most powerful corporation on earth. Its flagship, the Batavia, was a marvel of its age, a floating fortress packed with treasure. In 1628, she set sail from Holland on her maiden voyage, bound for the exotic Spice Islands. On board were over 300 souls, sailors, soldiers, and civilians hoping for a new life. The ship was commanded by Francisco Pelsert, a man of high rank but little sea experience. The skipper, Arion Jacobs, was a seasoned sailor who despised the commander's authority. But the most dangerous man on board was the under-merchant, Geronimus Cornelis. Geronimus was a charismatic apothecary, a failed businessman, and a secret heretic. He believed that the laws of God and man did not apply to him. He was a predator in waiting. During the long voyage, Geronimus and the skipper began to plot a mutiny against Pelsert. But before their plan could succeed, fate intervened in the most violent way possible. On the night of June 4, 1629, the Batavia slammed into an uncharted reef. It was the Houtman Abralos Islands, a desolate chain off the coast of Western Australia. The ship was torn apart, but nearly 200 survivors managed to scramble ashore. They were stranded on a tiny, barren island with no food and, most importantly, no water. Commander Pelsert and skipper Orion made a desperate decision. They took the ship's only longboat. With a small crew, they set off on an impossible journey to sail thousands of kilometers to the city of Batavia for help. They left the remaining 200 survivors behind, placing them under the command of Geronimus Cornelis. For Geronimus, this was not a disaster. It was an opportunity. His moment had finally arrived. With the commander gone, he could now build the world he had always dreamed of, a kingdom built on his own twisted ideals. He quickly gathered a core group of loyal mutineers around him, promising them power and riches. His first act was to take control of all the remaining food, water, and salvaged weapons. He then needed to eliminate anyone who might challenge his authority. He started with the strong. He sent a soldier named Weeb Hayes and his men to a nearby island on a false mission. He told them to search for water, convinced they would find none and perish from thirst. With the soldiers gone, Geronimus and his mutineers began their reign of terror on the main group of survivors. The sick and the weak were the first to be killed. They were labeled as useless burdens. They were drowned in the surf or taken out to sea on rafts and left to die. A new law was established on the island. The only law was the will of Geronimus. He declared that God and the devil were just fairy tales. All that mattered was pleasure and power. He and his men took the surviving women for themselves, creating a harem of sexual slaves. One woman, Lucretia Jans, a beautiful lady of high birth, was claimed by Geronimus for himself. Anyone who resisted or even complained was brutally executed. Fear was the ultimate currency. The mutineers began to kill for sport. They devised cruel games that ended in murder. For over 3 months, the island became a living hell, a place of unimaginable barbarity. But on the other island, something miraculous had happened. Weeb Hayes and his soldiers had survived. Against all odds, they had found a source of fresh water and food from local wildlife. They were alive and growing stronger. Some desperate survivors from Geronimus's island managed to escape. They swam across the treacherous channel to Weeby's island, telling him of the horrific massacres. Weeb Hayes now understood the truth. Geronimus had sent them away not as explorers, but as victims. He and his soldiers, horrified by the news, knew they were next. They prepared for war. They built a small makeshift fort out of stone slabs and sharpened weapons from debris. Geronimus, realizing his enemies were still alive, was furious. He knew he had to eliminate them. He launched a series of brutal attacks, trying to conquer Weeby's island. The mutineers had the muskets and swords salvaged from the Batavia. The soldiers had almost nothing. They fought back with makeshift pikes, clubs, and pure courage. Led by Weeb Hayes, the soldiers repelled the first attack, then a second, and a third against impossible odds. Weeb Hayes, the common soldier, had become the last line of defense against pure evil. Geronimus prepared for one final, massive assault that would overwhelm the soldiers. But just as the battle reached its climax, a new shape appeared on the horizon. A sail. It was a ship. Commander Pelsert had made it to Batavia and had returned with a rescue vessel. A desperate race began. Both Weeby's men and the mutineers saw the ship at the same time. Each side knew that whoever reached the ship first would get to tell their version of the story. Weeb Hayes, in a small, leaky raft, paddled with all his might across the open water. He reached the side of the rescue ship just moments before the mutineers' boat arrived. He climbed aboard and warned Commander Pelsert of the bloody mutiny and the massacres. Pelsert, horrified and disbelieving at first, quickly saw the truth. He armed his men. When the mutineers arrived, they were captured. The reign of terror was finally over. Pelsart then began the grim task of uncovering the full extent of the horror. He learned that Geronimus and his followers had murdered at least 125 men, women, and children. Justice needed to be swift. Returning to Holland would take too long. Pelsert established a makeshift court right there on the islands, at the edge of the world. The mutineers were interrogated, and under torture, they confessed to their horrific crimes. The full, nightmarish story of what happened on Batavia's graveyard was finally revealed. Geronimus Cornelis, the charismatic monster, showed no remorse for his actions. He and his chief lieutenants were sentenced to death. But a simple hanging was not deemed sufficient for their crimes against humanity. Before they were hanged, both of their hands were cut off as a final punishment. The sentence was carried out on a nearby island, a grim end to a grim saga. Weeb Hayes and the surviving soldiers were hailed as heroes. They had held the line for civilization. Of the 341 people who had left Holland on the Batavia, only around 70 would ever see home again. The story of the Batavia is a true and terrifying cautionary tale. It shows how quickly the rules of society can collapse under pressure. It reveals the darkness that can lurk within the human heart, even in an age of progress. It is a testament to the idea that heroes and monsters are not born, but are made by the choices they make. The wreck of the Batavia was rediscovered in 1963, and its remains are now in a museum. But its legacy is more than just a shipwreck. It's a profound and disturbing lesson. A lesson about leadership, morality, and the desperate struggle for survival. It stands as one of the most shocking and dramatic events in maritime history. A chilling tale of what can happen when humanity is left stranded at the edge of the world.